Yeah, so I'm not even going to explain this picture too much, except to say we put that there. So this is where you are. This is where I am. I really wish I could be there with you today, and we could chat more. But Canada is so huge. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about our context. To understand drainage in Ontario, you really have to understand Ontario. I'm assuming that you can see my cursor a little bit here, but like we're a forested area down here. And I think like you've got grasslands there, but our soil developed under forest conditions with water, a lot of water. And we've got 135 frost-free days, May 17th to September 25th, which when I looked is very similar to Rainy River, which I imagine, yeah, might not be that different from where you guys are. But that just gives a little bit of context for what our agriculture here. If I went all the way down to the very tip of southern Ontario, you'd be getting like 190 days frost-free there. So from April 25th to October 20th, they have definitely a longer growing season. They don't get the snow that we have. But anyways, that's just a little bit. I guess you would have a similar like glaciated soil. We have a glacial till layer that's about like 2 to 3 feet deep, which means that there's no natural drainage happening. That's a restrictive layer. So drainage has been really important to the development of Ontario agriculture. And also important to note that we are like surrounded by the Great Lakes, which totally influences how much rain we get. We're getting, where I am, we're getting about 40 inches in a year. That's snowfall and rain. But we're also at the head, all these little color blotches are our watersheds. So we're farming right at the head of the Maitland and the Grand River, which also means we're at one of the highest points, and we're also the coldest parts of southern Ontario. There's more heat units north of us than in our area. I like to think of us as the hat of southern Ontario. So all the water goes away from us. Traditionally, also this was hunting ground. So the indigenous people that lived here before, they didn't have settlements here. This was actually when we divided this all up into our treaties. They all kind of looked like pieces of pie that went towards where we are right here, because it was neutral trading grounds and hunting grounds. But anyways, water-wise, these are all watersheds, but they're also all conservation authorities. And so this was developed in 1946, the Conservation Authorities Act, which their job is to control flooding. And now they're looking at water quality as much as water quantity. But back in the day, it was about flooding. And so you have to manage water on a watershed basis. So these are now like governing bodies in association with the province and the local municipalities, which is a blessing and a curse because then there's local control of every sort of watershed area. But it also means that regulations are enacted a little bit differently across the province. And it also just shows you how much water we have leaving. We also have a lot of, I wonder if anyone can guess. I'm in the epicenter of something very large and red. Can anyone guess what this is a map of? It's hard to be interactive. Come on, just make a guess. Fine, it's cows. It's the cattle. We have so much livestock here, and it makes sense. Like all along here, these are all ports that go out. And so grain is typically grown around here, but the further inland you are, the more likely you were going to value add that grain and like walk your crops off on hoof back in the day. But so that's historically, but it still continues to be the most heavily dominated by livestock: chickens, dairy, hogs, beef. We got a lot of manure down here. And when it was surveyed, this area, you guys have sections and quarters. We just have 100-acre blocks. Everything was a mixed farm. You had a little bit of cows, a little bit of everything. Everything was 100 acres, 200 acres. Now we have much consolidated, but we still have a lot of livestock. That just gives a little bit of context to what I'm about to tell you. So this is my family's farm. We grow a lot of corn, soybeans, wheat down here. The livestock farms grow a lot of hay. There's a barn, there's a barn, there's a barn, there's barns spotting the whole landscape. When you can't expand, like I'd say a typical farm, if you have got livestock, some people, some sort of Mennonite farmers still have 100 acres. But the majority, if you're going to not have any livestock and you're just trying to make money cash cropping, you'd have to have 2,000 acres to pencil it out. So fun facts, our land costs about $30,000 an acre. That's Farm Credit Canada's most recent stat. But in terms of yields, we're getting 200 bushels for corn, 50 bushels for soybeans, and 100 bushels for our winter wheat. Most of the wheat is winter wheat, planted right after soybeans come off. So this just gives a little bit of context. So when we can't really expand, we can't just buy more land, especially at that rate. And so we're investing a lot into making our land more productive. And how we do that is by making lines all over our fields. So we have subsurface drainage in our part of the world in Ontario. I'd estimate it's about 50% is systematically drained, just like this picture. There's a lot of random drainage. Any drainage contractor would actually say probably every field has subsurface drainage in Ontario, but about 50% would be systematically tiled like this. And that cost is about $1,200 to $1,500 an acre to do the installation. And hopefully that would last at least 50 years, sort of investment. And how we install it is very fun. We've got a lot of these self-propelled drainage plows, and there's, Tate's, Bronze, Wolf's, all these plows are made in Ontario. And it's a longer story why. But yeah, this guy's installing 4-inch tile at about 3 feet deep, and our spacing is typically every 30 feet. All we're doing here is lowering the water table. So we often talk about tile, but back in the day, it used to be clay tile that they would make a hole in the ground, but now it's not tile, it's a tube. It's a corrugated tube with perforations in it. And all it's doing is just lowering the water table 2 to 3 feet. It kind of has a little bulge here. That's the pressure that's actually the water is entering the tile pipe from below. And it's not all the water. I think that's important to note. A lot of environmentalists too think that we're just completely drying out the soil. This is just the gravitational water. Just like you would have, we often explain it like how you'd have a hole in the bottom of a flower pot. Like the soil, like it needs a place to naturally drain, and so you don't saturate all your roots. So we systematically tile that. This is the thing though, where does the water go? We always have to start with the end in mind, because it is illegal in Ontario to just dump your water on your neighbor. The British common law, only if you are right beside a water course do you have the right to drain into that water course. Everyone else, as I say, has to fight for the right to party. You have to fight for the right to drainage. Surface water under British common law, you couldn't stop your neighbor's surface water from coming onto your property, but say your neighbor had somehow collected it into some sort of a channel or through a berm, or obviously through subsurface drainage, you cannot put that on your neighbor's property. So what we need to do is to have proper drains. So this is what a proper drain looks like. At one point, we would have called it a creek. Now it's a municipal drain. It's also a great habitat for freshwater mussels, which means this is actually a highly regulated drain. And this is from one of our family's properties. You can see the tile outletting right here. And we often have like quite a bit of a buffer and capacity for spring melts and floods. So, but this is also a drain. This was just installed this summer. You can obviously, once they're finished with it, you wouldn't even know it was there. This is probably like a 24-inch concrete pipe that they put the holes in so you can connect your field drainage in. But this is a municipal drain. And if it hits a road, it goes under the road. That particular project, I think they had to bore it under 4 different roads for that municipal project this summer. So how many drains do we have? a lot, a lot, a lot, a lot. If you look closely, probably every field here is connected to a drain. If it's perforated line, that means it was underground. And if it's a straight line, then it's above an open drain, as we would call it. But every field would be attached or like have outlet in some way to a drain, except, and I'm just going to tell you my personal problems right here. I have a field I want to drain that's not connected to anything. So this is a field I want to drain right here. We're so close to the Kratz drain, but there's actually quite a hill that we would have to move between watersheds. All I want to do is take it here to the water course. This is 3 different landowners that we would have to get across. I've done the math. We've looked at LiDAR. We've made a plan. It would cost about $150,000 to put in a pipe that would drain our land. And there's 2 options that I'm currently wrestling with, let's say. The first is a mutual agreement drain. So if I was on really great terms with all 3 of those neighbors downstream, we could work together, figure out who's going to pay what of that 150 grand or whatever I just said, and then figure out who's going to pay what, get the job done, work with lawyers and put it on every land title. And so that would be a mutual agreement drain. Or if we couldn't get along, I can get a municipal drain, which basically would mean that we would involve an engineer to do all the design. The municipality would take care of all of the construction and they would bill it back to all of us, appropriated like how they would decide. And the other thing is we would qualify for 33% to be funded by the Ontario government. So you can see there's pros and cons for doing a municipal agreement versus a municipal drain. Municipal, yeah, you're involving engineers, so it immediately gets double the cost, but you're also getting 1/3 of that back from the government. But really, there's no stopping a petition. In order to be a legal or a valid petition, you'd have to have 60% of the land of the area to be drained would need to be an agreement that they want the drainage. And then the municipality is basically forced to do it. We have the Drainage Act. I'll explain it a little bit about it in the next slide. This is essentially the petition. I would just need to fill it all out, tell my municipality that we need outlet, and especially if we're over 60% of the land to be drained, which we are, they really can't stop us. If they did try to stop us, we would appeal that to the Ministry of Agriculture's tribunal. And then if it still didn't go through, we would appeal it to a drainage referee. So we have this Drainage Act. You probably can't even read that. But anyways, we have this Drainage Act. And we'd almost have to go back in time to really get how important it is. It was one of the very first pieces of legislation passed in Upper Canada, even before there was a Canada. Especially in Ontario, there was just no natural drainage. If there was going to be agriculture, there needed to be drainage. And so the act to regulate line fences and water courses in 1835 was the very first thing that like basically gave people the right to drainage. And all this was happening at the same time as they were starting to do subsurface drainage. John Johnston brought what they were doing in Europe to New York and to Ontario, and literally installing clay tiles to make the holes in the subsurface. And they started manufacturing clay tiles, but all of that is for naught if you do not have adequate outlet. And that's why the Drainage Act was really, really powerful, facilitating outlet for drainage. The Tile Drainage Act, though, in 1878 is even potentially more interesting, which is a loan. It still exists today. It is 75% of your drainage cost, up to $50,000 every year, with a 6% interest rate, and you repay it in 10 equal installments on your tax bill. So it is a provincial loan from the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture to farmers, and it's administered through your municipality. And farmers, for the longest time, were not taking advantage of that because of interest rates. Well, that 6% interest rate wasn't alluring. although that could change in the future. But that still exists to this day. So, and then here I've also got, the Ontario Agriculture College and the Ontario government at every point has been the biggest cheerleader for drainage in Ontario, demonstrating and also ensuring that it's done well. So in 1873, this is the last piece of legislation I've got highlighted here on this slide. Because this was it's all done kind of underground. You get a contractor in, and a few years later, you wonder if they even came in or not. Like, you want to make sure with the amount that you're paying, that you're really getting quality drainage installation. And so they basically have a licensing program for contractors. So the business needs to be licensed and by the government. Every plow that is going to be installing tile needs to have a license. It needs to be inspected and licensed. And then every operator, a Class A operator, has 500 hours of apprenticing they need to do before they get their operator's license. And every business needs to have an operator and a licensed machine. So this is the government. Like, it was the contractors themselves that worked with the government to create this. And basically, like, any farmer can still install tile on their own property. They can do it however they want with a backhoe or whatnot. But if you're going to be getting someone else to tile your ground, it needs to be a licensed drainage contractor, or else they're going to get a big fine. So that's a little bit of our history in a nutshell. And again, all of this is to say that our government has been at the forefront of encouraging drainage and making sure that drainage is done correctly and well. Now back to this map. And also, you can interrupt at any point if there's questions, Candace, that I can't hear. Let me know. I thought this was funny. As I was grabbing a picture of the municipal drains in my area, I just took a little scroll down a little bit further south. This is Chatham, Kent. Guess what happened in the middle of this slide? There's all this nice topography, and suddenly gets very, very flat. I feel like the prairies knows what very flat is, but we also know what very flat is here in Ontario. This, well, when the water had no more downhill to go, this was a giant swamp. And Chatham, Kent now has, we always joke that water runs downhill, but a lot of agriculture in Ontario relies on water getting pumped uphill in order to be able to farm it. There are 130 pump stations in this one municipality alone, 4,100 municipal drains, and there's more miles of drainage ditches than there are roads. And there's a dozen drainage superintendents. So a drainage superintendent is, again, all these municipal drains need to be managed, and they have usually a person on staff, or they hire an engineer. Every municipality is responsible for maintaining and supervising those drains. So, and this one municipality has 12 drainage superintendents. Let's go back in time just for a little bit. This is how they drained it. This was a swamp in the 1800s. It was infested with mosquitoes and disease. The Inniskillen swamp, and there was many swamps down there. They were given to, like, the farmland, I'm putting that in air quotes, if you can't see at the back, was given to loyalists and soldiers, and they didn't even claim the land. They were like, no, thank you. I don't even know what to do with that. So it was huge funded projects to drain these large wetlands, essentially. This is from 1856. You probably can't see it. Digging a ditch, they're just tendering it out from the Cull Drain to Lake Wawanosh. Lake Wawanosh doesn't even exist. I had to look it on a map. So they dug deep ditches and got the water away, and were eventually able to manage the water so much that there's highly productive farmland now. And this is acres and acres and acres. So today we have mapped in Ontario provincially significant wetlands, and they're incorporated into the Planning Act. It directs development at every level. The municipality, can't go against and can't sort of drain a provincially significant wetland. And it's enforced also by the conservation authorities. I like to joke that Enniskillen is a provincially significant former wetland because it's very productive farmland now, but it's hard to say, in a sense, what was lost through the draining of that area. A farmer friend of mine, he says, when you harm or destroy a part of nature, you inherit its job. So you have to really understand the ecological function of what you changed because you're taking responsibility for it now. So I always just think about that when I think about what we're doing on the landscape. Obviously, like a lot of our agriculture, like everything of our agriculture depended on drainage, but we often wonder what sort of issues it's created. And this is the obligatory slide on all of my presentations. I bet you guys don't have this, but in Toledo, which is right here in Ohio, there was a few days in 2014 where they couldn't drink their water. The algae bloom was so, it got into their drinking water supply, and it would have been toxic and deadly if anyone had taken a sip. So that hugely changed the conversation about water quality. And what we're really talking about is nitrogen and phosphorus. Nitrogen is, they say, like the limiting nutrient in a saltwater system that would create the algae bloom and the dead zones that they have in the Gulf of Mexico. So the Mississippi, when we talk to our US counterparts, all they care about is nitrogen. But here in the Great Lakes region, at least, and in Michigan and Ohio, we care about phosphorus because phosphorus is the limiting nutrient that's causing the algae bloom in Lake Erie. So, and in the interest of time, I'm not even going to talk about nitrogen anymore. But phosphorus is what we're looking at. As if the closer we can get to the field, the cheaper the solutions are. So I always say avoid and then control and then treat as your last option. So avoiding is the cheapest way of never having the problem starting to begin with. Don't apply excess phosphorus. That's easier said than done. I know. And I also think it's important to note that tile drainage is a best management practice for phosphorus in many respects because phosphorus moves with the soil. And tile drainage, at least in Ontario, greatly reduces soil erosion. So if there is like a sponge, and you can infiltrate the water through the soil, that's the best filter. So automatically, we know that tile drainage does reduce surface erosion, soil erosion, and it reduces particulate phosphorus loss. The problem is that it then becomes a transport pathway for dissolved phosphorus. But also, I like to think that now that it's in the tile system, it's actually controlled, contained, and there's ways that we can manage it once it's in the system. So that's the kind of moving forward into the innovation that I want to kind of move into right now in my presentation. When we talk about water quality, we're often talking about the concentration of phosphorus and then also the flow, which means that there's two ways that we can tackle the problem. One is to treat the water, like reduce the concentration, or the other one is just to control the amount of water that's leaving the system. And that is where control drainage comes in. Really, again, I like to say that tile drainage is the best management practice for phosphorus until it's not. And all I want to do is just turn it off. It's great until it's not. And then I just want to turn it off. And you totally can do that underground by just basically putting stop logs of a dam underneath the ground. And it will totally back up the water table. And it actually can be great for preserving the nutrients and the water later in the season. Problem is that only works on flat ground. You can imagine what it would do on a slope like that. And only 2% of Ontario is flat enough to put that in. But this is from a field that we put in that control gate on a 3 to 9% slope, which you probably couldn't even imagine in Saskatchewan, let's be honest. That would be like a ski hill, maybe to you, but we still farm those things. So this is them putting in an agri-drain control gate. And if you can imagine, this is this is the field that we installed it on. If you can imagine, this is a gully that kind of comes around here and then swings around here. There is a control gate on every single one of these lateral tiles. Because if you can imagine, the tile was put in at a 0.1% slope. And in order to do that, it has to snake around the topography of the field. So if you can imagine, like this little lateral right here, I don't know if you can see my slide even, or my mouse, but it's controlling all the way back here. And that is a flat, basically flat grade. So because of that, we were able to essentially stop the water from leaving that field once we didn't want it to leave anymore. And then we put it a side by side with a conventional type and then not drained at all. And we're going to be monitoring the water quality from it. This is what it looks like actually on the ground with farmers in it. We tried 4 different types of control gates. It's really, this is like not rocket science. It's an elbow that's on the end of the drainage pipe, either the inlet or the outlet. And then the riser, like it's just a PVC pipe. It's what this guy's actually leaning on, is what you pop on the elbow. And that literally like dictates the height of the water table, because that's the pressure that would have to rise in order to overtop that. So again, not rocket science. We built each one of these for about $200 a piece. Those were the ones we made ourselves. So, and then, oh yeah, we're working with the conservation authorities. It's actually an amazing partnership. This was on County of Huron land, so it was municipal land, working with the conservation authority and our tile contractors and Ontario Soil and Crop Improvement Association. So this is in general, like the whole kind of schematic of it. We did a lot of different types of drainage research, and we're looking at it from a water quality and a quantity standpoint, over top with our yields and a lot of different monitoring. We're even monitoring the groundwater as well. And all this to show is, if you didn't see in this little corner, these are wetlands. We're actually tiling and outletting into a wetland that we put there. I know I talked about just taking them out, but we're also putting them back in places that make sense. Which is like, when you think about controlling drainage, yes, it makes sense to control it within the field, but what if you can control it within like the much bigger field? If you put it into a wetland, it's still controlling drainage because it never left. And this is where I think it'd be really cool to just run it back and do irrigation with that water. So it's drainage water recycling is, like, in my mind, the next frontier, because a wetland is not only controlling, but it is treating. Anytime there's vegetation that's taking up the excess nutrients, it's a good thing. And not only can we do irrigation like here with a pivot, this is not just my imagination, but I actually went to Illinois and they were putting the water back in like it was like a control gate. And now imagine that you just put the faucet back on the upstream side of that control gate, and now you start backfilling your tile with water, and it will infiltrate out in the middle. Obviously, this is in the middle of the season when there's no water there, and it could drastically increase your yields, and you're reusing those nutrients as well. So this is legitimately happening in Northern Illinois. It was installed by Grade Solutions, Laverne Weber, and it was designed by Jeremy Miners, who is also the one that did that other field that I was just referring to. So one last note before I'll leave you to discuss is then I'm thinking, okay, field level, but also going back to the municipal drains. What if we thought of the whole watershed as a way of controlling drainage? This particular field, and again, I worked for a conservation authority, and this is where I worked on this project. It was a farmer that every year he just had flooding issues. The municipal drain just like spread across his field, and he had flooding, and he had to sort of dredge out that ditch every 2 years or so. It was just a mess. And so what he did was work with a conservation authority And they installed very strategically, installed a few wetlands, one overtops to the other. They installed them in the right places. They put some berms and some grassed waterways to control when there was like overland flow. And they put in a nitrate filter. They rearranged the channel to have a meandering flow so it was self-cleaning. And all of this took 10 years probably to do, but by the end of it, they had improved the water quality so much and across this field to the point that they now have like a cold stream trout spawning area right here. And it's totally restored. And it's such a good news story about agriculture working with the environment, working with our understanding of how the environment works. Yes, we took out wetlands, but we rearranged it to kind of serve that ecological function. So all this goes back to my ugly picture at the beginning, which is to say, yes, we put this wetland here. We've outlet the drain from this land into here and all of this is contoured. And so there's potential that we can retrofit in the future to take that water and put it back on the field when it needs it. Because we also get drought in the middle of the summer. We get a lot of rain in the spring and then it stops raining and we wish we could get that back. You probably have questions about cover crops as well. This was soybeans planted into a multi-species cover crop that it had been, I think it looks like it was strip tilled. And then the cover crop was burnt off with Roundup that morning. And it was a tremendous crop. I like to think that cover crops is also a way that we can manage water anytime we're managing, the soil, and like it's going to take a whole system. So that is the end. And this is my contact.